I'm really glad you're here today. Seriously, take a moment and settle in. Maybe you're listening while walking, maybe you're relaxing with a cup of coffee, or maybe you just needed a quiet moment in your day. Wherever you are, I'm happy you decided to spend this time with me. Today we're going to explore the life of a woman whose journey feels almost unbelievable at first. A woman who started with almost nothing, who faced loss, poverty, and discrimination, and still managed to build a business empire that changed thousands of lives. And before we dive in, if you enjoy stories like this and want more inspiring English conversations like this one, subscribing to English to Inspire helps more people discover these stories too. Now imagine this for a moment. A woman born just after the end of slavery in the United States rose up to become one of the first self-made female millionaires in American history. Not only that, but she builds a company that gives economic independence to thousands of other women. She becomes a leader, a mentor, and a voice for justice in a time when both racism and sexism were everywhere. The woman we're talking about is Madam C.J. Walker, but the incredible success most people talk about today didn't begin with money, comfort, or opportunity. It began with a little girl born into a world that was still learning how to live after centuries of slavery. She was born in 1867 in Louisiana, only 2 years after the end of the American Civil War. Her birth name was Sarah Breedlove. Her parents had been enslaved before freedom finally arrived. Imagine growing up in that moment in history. Freedom existed on paper, but life was still extremely hard for many black families in the South. Opportunities were limited, education was rare, and poverty was everywhere. Sarah was the 5th child in her family, but something about her birth was different from her older brothers and sisters. She was the first one in her family born into freedom. Think about that for a second. Her parents had lived their early lives as property owned by others. Sarah entered the world legally free. That sounds like a huge change, but freedom did not mean comfort or security. Her family still worked long, exhausting days as laborers on cotton plantations. Imagine the hot Louisiana sun, the endless rows of cotton fields, the feeling of dust and sweat in the air. Children and families like Sarah's often worked from a very young age. Life was about survival, not dreams. There was little time for school or play. Every member of the family helped however they could. And then, when Sarah was only 7 years old, tragedy arrived quietly, but powerfully. Both of her parents died. Just like that, the small sense of stability, she had disappeared. At 7 years old, she became an orphan. Think about being that young and suddenly losing the 2 people who protect you the most. For many children, that moment would close the door to almost every possibility. Sarah moved in with her older sister and brother-in-law. But life there was not easy either. Her brother-in-law was strict and often harsh. The home did not feel safe or peaceful. So Sarah did what many girls in difficult situations did during that time. At only 14 years old, she got married. Today that age sounds shocking, and it is. But for her, marriage was a way to escape a painful home environment. Her husband, Moses McWilliams, worked as a laborer. They were both extremely young and trying to survive in a tough world. A few years later, Sarah became a mother. Her daughter, Lelia, was born in 1885. For the first time in her life, Sarah had someone who depended on her completely. If you've ever had someone in your life who relies on you, You know the feeling. It changes how you see the future. Suddenly your choices are not just about you anymore. But life did not become easier. When Sarah was only 20 years old, her husband died. Once again, loss entered her life. Now she was a young widow with a small daughter to raise alone. Imagine standing in that moment. No education, very little money, limited opportunities, and a child depending on you for everything. Many people would feel trapped. Many people would believe their life was already decided. So Sarah made a difficult but important decision. She packed her few belongings and moved to the city of St. Louis. Several of her brothers were already living there, working as barbers. It was not a glamorous move. She was not chasing a dream yet. She was simply trying to survive. In St. Louis, Sarah found work as a washerwoman. The job was exactly what it sounds like. Long days washing clothes for other families by hand. Imagine large metal tubs filled with water, soap, and piles of heavy clothing. Your hands stay in water for hours. Your back hurts from bending and scrubbing. The work is repetitive and exhausting. And the pay? Around $1.50 a day. That small amount of money had to cover food, shelter, and clothing for both Sarah and her daughter. But even in those long, tiring days, something important was happening quietly inside her mind. She was watching people. She was observing the world around her. She was beginning to imagine that maybe, somehow, life could become different. Have you ever had a moment like that? When life feels heavy and repetitive, but a small voice inside you whispers that your story might not be finished yet. Sarah didn't know it at the time, but those difficult days as a washerwoman were slowly preparing her for a discovery that would change not only her own life, but the lives of thousands of women across the country. And strangely enough, that discovery would begin with a very personal problem she could no longer ignore. By the time Sarah Breedlove reached her early 30s, life had already asked a lot from her. Long days as a washerwoman had become normal. She woke up early, worked with her hands in water for hours, and went to sleep exhausted. Day after day looked almost the same, but something new began to worry her deeply, something that at first might seem small, yet it felt very personal and painful. Her hair started falling out. At that time, many women, especially poor women working in hard conditions, suffered from scalp diseases and hair loss. Clean water was not always easy to access. Many homes had poor sanitation, which simply means unhealthy living conditions. Harsh soaps and strong chemicals could damage the scalp. Nutrition was also limited for families struggling with poverty. Imagine standing in front of a small mirror and seeing more and more of your hair disappearing. For many people today, hair is connected to identity, confidence, and self-expression. In Sarah's time, that feeling was even stronger in many communities. Hair care was not just about appearance. It was about dignity. Sarah tried many things to solve the problem. She experimented with homemade remedies. Some people suggested oils. Others recommended different soaps, but nothing seemed to work well. Her scalp remained irritated, and the hair loss continued. Now here's something interesting. Problems often hide opportunities inside them, but we usually can't see that at first. When we face a difficulty, our first reaction is frustration or embarrassment. We just want the problem to disappear. But sometimes the very thing that bothers us the most becomes the doorway to something bigger. Think about your own life for a moment. Has there ever been a problem that forced you to learn something new? Maybe it pushed you to ask questions you never asked before. Sometimes that's how new ideas are born. For Sarah, curiosity slowly replaced frustration. Instead of simply accepting the situation, she began paying attention to hair products being sold in her community. She listened carefully when women talked about their hair problems. She noticed what people were trying, what worked a little, and what didn't work at all. During this time, she heard about a successful hair care entrepreneur named Annie Turnbull Malone. Annie had created products designed specifically for black women's hair and scalp health. This was very important because many products on the market at that time simply ignored the needs of black customers. Sarah became one of Annie Malone's customers, and eventually she also began working as a sales agent for her products. This experience opened a new door in Sarah's life. For the first time, she was not only working with soap and laundry, she was learning about business. Imagine her traveling through neighborhoods, speaking with women, explaining how certain products could help their hair and scalp. She was observing how sales worked. She was learning how confidence, communication, and trust could turn a simple product into a solution people wanted. One small conversation at a time, she began building skills she didn't even realize she was developing. She learned how to speak clearly with customers. She learned how to explain benefits in simple language. She learned that when people feel understood, they are much more willing to listen. Have you ever noticed that the best businesses often begin by solving a real problem? Not an imaginary one, not a trendy one, a real daily frustration that people face. That was exactly what Sarah was seeing around her. Women everywhere were struggling with scalp problems and hair loss just like she had. The need was huge, and very few companies truly understood it. But inside Sarah's mind, another thought slowly started forming. At first, it may have felt almost impossible to say out loud. After all, she had very little formal education. She had spent years washing clothes for survival. She had never owned a business. Still, the idea kept returning. What if she could create something better? Here's a quiet moment that happens in many successful stories. It's the moment when someone stops seeing themselves only as a worker and begins to imagine becoming a creator, a builder, someone who brings a solution into the world. For Sarah, that moment was slowly arriving. She began experimenting more seriously with her own hair treatments. She tried different combinations of ingredients. Oils, soaps, and other materials were tested again and again. Sometimes the mixtures failed. Sometimes they worked a little better. Picture her in a small room late at night after a long day of work, carefully mixing ingredients, hoping the next attempt might improve the health of her scalp. This was not a glamorous laboratory. It was simple, patient experimentation. But something important was happening inside her mindset. Instead of thinking, "Why is this happening to me?" she was beginning to think, "How can I solve this?" That small shift in thinking can change an entire life. And as Sarah continued experimenting, learning from customers, and studying how hair products were sold, she was getting closer to a decision that would transform her future. A decision that required courage, independence, and the belief that she could build something of her own. There was a moment in Sarah Breedlove's life when the quiet experiments she had been doing started to feel more serious. Up until then, her days were still filled with the exhausting routine of washing clothes for other families. The tubs of water, the heavy fabrics, the endless scrubbing, all of that continued. But now, in the background of that routine, another life was slowly forming. She had begun to understand something important about the hair problems she and many other women were facing. It was not just about the hair itself. Often the real issue was the health of the scalp. When the scalp is clean, nourished, and treated gently, hair has a much better chance to grow strong. This may sound simple today, but at that time it was a powerful insight for many women who had never been taught proper hair care. Sarah kept experimenting with oils and treatments. She tested different combinations, paying close attention to what improved her scalp and what made things worse. Slowly she noticed progress. Her scalp began to heal. Her hair started to grow back. Imagine how that must have felt. After months of worry and embarrassment, she could finally see a small but real improvement in the mirror. It wasn't just a physical change. It was a moment of hope. If her hair could recover, maybe the same thing could happen for many other women. And remember, during this time she was still interacting with customers while selling hair products in her community. These conversations became incredibly valuable. Women would talk openly about their frustrations. Some complained about itching and irritation. Others talked about thinning hair or bald spots. Sarah listened carefully. Listening is an underrated skill. Many people rush to talk about their ideas, but the most useful ideas often come from listening first. Sarah was learning directly from the experiences of real women around her. But something else was also happening inside her thinking. She began to imagine not just selling products for someone else, but creating her own solution. That idea was bold, especially for a black woman in the early 1900s. Opportunities for entrepreneurship were extremely limited. Racism and sexism were strong barriers in society. Still, the thought refused to disappear. At some point, Sarah made a life-changing decision. She would stop simply working for other people's businesses and begin building her own. That decision required courage because it meant stepping into uncertainty. There was no guarantee of success. She did not have a large amount of money saved. She did not have powerful investors waiting to support her. What she had instead was something less visible, but just as powerful: experience with the problem, a working solution she believed in, and the determination to try. Around this time, she also chose a new name for herself. She began calling herself Madam C.J. Walker, taking the last name of her second husband, Charles Joseph Walker. The title Madam was not just decoration. In those days, it was often used by women in the beauty industry to signal professionalism and expertise. Think about that choice for a moment. Names carry meaning. By choosing the name Madam C.J. Walker, she was not only creating a brand for her business, she was stepping into a new identity. She was telling the world and perhaps reminding herself that she was now a businesswoman. Have you ever noticed how powerful identity can be? When someone begins to see themselves differently, not just as a worker, but as a builder or a leader, their actions start to change as well. Madam Walker began selling her own hair treatment products directly to customers. She traveled from place to place, often going door to door. Imagine her walking through neighborhoods, carrying her products, speaking with women on front porches, explaining how proper scalp care could improve their hair health. But she didn't just sell a bottle and leave. She demonstrated how to use the products. She showed women how to wash their hair properly, how to massage the scalp, and how to maintain healthy routines. This approach made a big difference. She was not just selling a product. She was teaching a method, a system of care that many women had never learned before. Customers began noticing results. Word spread. One woman told another, then another, and slowly, almost quietly at first, something exciting began happening. The small experiments that started in a humble room were turning into a real business. People were beginning to recognize the name Madam C.J. Walker. Still, the journey ahead was far from easy. Building a business is never a straight path. Growth brings new challenges, new risks, and new responsibilities. But one important realization was starting to guide her decisions. If this business was going to grow beyond one person going door to door, she would need more than just a good product. She would need people. She would need a community of women who could carry this idea into cities and neighborhoods far beyond her own reach. As Madam C.J. Walker continued traveling and selling her hair care products, something interesting started happening. At first, she was simply focused on helping women improve the health of their hair and scalp. She demonstrated her treatments, explained the importance of cleanliness, and showed women how to care for their hair step by step. But during these conversations, she began noticing something deeper. Many of the women she met were living lives very similar to the life she had lived not long before. They worked long hours doing hard labor. Some were cooks in other people's homes. Some cleaned houses. Others worked in laundries, standing for hours in hot rooms filled with steam and heavy washing machines. The pay was low, the work was exhausting, and opportunities for advancement were almost non-existent. Madam Walker saw their frustration because she had lived it herself. She knew exactly what it felt like to work all day and still struggle to provide for a family. She knew the quiet feeling of wishing for something more, but not knowing where to begin. One afternoon, after finishing a demonstration of her hair treatment, a woman asked her a simple question. Could I sell these products too? That question might have sounded small, but it opened a new door in Madam Walker's thinking. Until that moment, she had mostly been focused on selling products herself. But now she began imagining something bigger. What if other women could sell the products as well? What if this business could become an opportunity for many women, not just for her? Think about that shift for a moment. Some people build businesses only to improve their own lives. There is nothing wrong with that. But the most powerful businesses often grow when they create opportunity for others too. Madam Walker decided to try something new. She began teaching women how to sell her products. She showed them how to explain the benefits, how to demonstrate the treatments, and how to build trust with customers. These women became known as Walker agents. Imagine the energy of those early training moments. A group of women gathered together, learning not only about hair care, but also about confidence, presentation, and financial independence. For many of them, this was the first time anyone had encouraged them to think like entrepreneurs. Madam Walker didn't simply hand them a box of products and send them away. She believed strongly in education. She taught them about hygiene, about personal appearance, and about speaking with pride and professionalism. She wanted them to feel respected, both by their customers and by themselves. Have you ever had someone believe in your potential before you fully believed in it yourself? That kind of encouragement can be life-changing. As more women joined the network, the Walker business began growing faster. Instead of one person traveling from neighborhood to neighborhood, there were now many women carrying the products into different communities. Each new Walker agent brought the system to new customers, new families, and new cities. And something beautiful began to happen along the way. These women were not only improving their own financial situations, they were also supporting each other. They shared advice. They celebrated each other's successes. They encouraged each other when sales were slow. In many ways, Madam Walker had created more than a company. She had created a community. During this time, her reputation began spreading quickly. Women appreciated that her products were designed specifically for them, but they also admired the confidence and dignity she represented. Here was a black woman who had built something meaningful through determination and creativity. Imagine attending one of her demonstrations in those days. She would stand confidently before the audience, explaining how to care for the scalp, how to apply the treatment, and how regular care could transform hair health. Her voice carried authority because she spoke from personal experience. People trusted her because she understood their lives. Her business soon expanded beyond small local sales. Demand increased so much that she needed a more organized system to produce and distribute the products. This meant new challenges: manufacturing, packaging, shipping, and managing a growing network of agents. Success often creates new responsibilities. When something begins working, the next question becomes, how do you scale it? In simple terms, how do you grow it without losing quality? Madam Walker started thinking bigger again. If this movement of women entrepreneurs was going to continue growing, she would need stronger infrastructure, factories, training centers, and leadership structures that could support thousands of agents across the country. The small business she once carried door to door was transforming into something far more powerful than she had imagined during those late nights of experimenting with oils and soaps. As the number of Walker agents continued to grow, Madam C.J. Walker realized that her small operation could no longer stay informal. In the early days, she had mixed products in small batches and sold them directly to customers. That approach worked when the business was tiny, but now the demand was spreading from city to city. Women from different communities were writing to her, asking how they could become agents and sell the products in their own neighborhoods. Imagine receiving letters from people you have never met, asking to join your mission. That is when you know something meaningful is happening. To support this growth, Madam Walker needed structure. She needed reliable production, organized training, and clear leadership. So she made a bold move and relocated her business to Indianapolis, a city that offered better transportation and distribution opportunities. This decision was not random. Indianapolis was a railway hub, which meant products could be shipped across the country more easily. Think about the mindset behind that choice. Many people start something small and feel comfortable keeping it small. Growth can feel intimidating. It requires planning, investment, and the willingness to take risks. But Madam Walker understood that if her goal was to help thousands of women build income, The company needed a strong foundation. In Indianapolis, she established a real manufacturing operation for her hair care products. Bottles were produced, labels were printed, and shipments were organized. For the first time, the Walker business looked less like a traveling sales effort and more like a true company. But Madam Walker did not stop there. She knew that the success of the company depended on the success of the women selling the products. If they felt confident, trained, and respected, the business would continue growing naturally. So she created a training program that became known as the Walker System. This system taught women how to care for the scalp, how to apply the products correctly, and how to educate customers about healthy hair practices. But the training went beyond beauty techniques. It also included lessons on business skills. Imagine a room filled with women listening carefully as Madam Walker explained how to manage money, how to present themselves professionally, and how to build relationships with customers. Many of these women had never received formal business education before. For them, these lessons were opening an entirely new world. Madam Walker also encouraged her agents to dress neatly and carry themselves with confidence. She believed appearance and attitude communicated respect. When the Walker agents arrived at a home to demonstrate the products, they represented not only the brand but also the possibility of independence. Have you ever noticed how confidence can change how people respond to you? When someone believes in the value of what they offer, others can feel it. That kind of belief is contagious. The Walker agents became known not only for selling products, but also for bringing knowledge and empowerment into their communities. Women who joined the program often found themselves earning far more than they had ever earned doing domestic work. Some were able to support their families in ways they had never imagined before. And something else began happening that Madam Walker deeply valued. These women were becoming leaders in their neighborhoods. They were teaching others, mentoring new agents, and creating networks of support. In time, Madam Walker organized large gatherings where her agents could come together. These meetings were filled with energy and pride. Women shared their experiences, celebrated achievements, and encouraged one another to grow even further. Picture the atmosphere of one of those gatherings. Hundreds of women dressed elegantly, speaking confidently about business strategies, customer relationships, and financial goals. Just a few years earlier, many of them had been working in exhausting jobs with very little recognition. Now they were entrepreneurs. Think about the power of that transformation. One woman's determination had opened a pathway for thousands of others to change their lives as well. Of course, success at this scale also brought new attention. The name Madam C.J. Walker was beginning to spread across the United States. Newspapers wrote about her growing business. Customers talked about the effectiveness of her products. More and more people wanted to understand how this remarkable enterprise had been built. And as her company expanded, something extraordinary became clear. Madam Walker was no longer just a successful salesperson or a small business owner. She was becoming one of the most influential female entrepreneurs of her time. By the early 1910s, the business created by Madam C.J. Walker had grown far beyond what anyone could have imagined during those early days of mixing oils and treatments in a small room. Her company was now producing large quantities of hair care products, shipping them across the United States, and supporting a growing network of Walker agents who carried the brand into cities and towns everywhere. At this stage, Madam Walker was no longer traveling door to door herself. Her role had changed. She had become the leader of a large and expanding organization. But interestingly, she never lost the habits that helped her build the business in the first place. She continued to listen carefully to customers and agents, paying attention to their experiences and ideas. One of the ways she stayed connected was by visiting different cities where her agents were working. These trips were not just business inspections. They were moments of encouragement. Imagine a room filled with women who had joined the Walker network, suddenly seeing the founder walk in. The woman whose story had inspired them was now standing in front of them. Madam Walker would speak to them not as employees, but as partners in a shared mission. She reminded them that their work mattered not only because they were selling products, but because they were creating economic independence for themselves and their families. Think about that phrase for a moment, economic independence. It simply means having the ability to earn and control your own income. Today, that idea might sound normal, but for many women in the early 1900s, especially black women in America, that level of independence was extremely rare. Madam Walker understood the importance of that freedom because she had once lived without it. She knew what it felt like to work endlessly while barely surviving. Now she was watching thousands of women step into a different kind of life. Her company continued to expand its operations. Factories increased production. Offices handled orders and communication. Training programs prepared new agents to enter the business. Everything was becoming more organized and professional. In 1910, Madam Walker made another important move. She relocated the headquarters of her company to Indianapolis and later established an even larger presence in Harlem, New York. Harlem was becoming a center of black culture, creativity, and business. Being part of that environment connected her company to a powerful and growing community. Imagine walking through the streets of Harlem during that time. Musicians, writers, artists, and entrepreneurs were creating new opportunities and new voices in American culture. Madam Walker's company became part of that movement of progress. Her success was becoming impossible to ignore. Newspapers began writing about her achievements. Business leaders were curious about how she had built such a successful enterprise, starting with almost nothing. People admired the fact that she had created a national brand in an era filled with barriers. Eventually, it became clear that Madam C.J. Walker had achieved something truly historic. She had become one of the first self-made female millionaires in the United States. Take a moment to think about that. A woman who once earned about $1.50 a day washing clothes had built a business worth more than $1 million. And she had done it during a time when society offered very few opportunities to women like her. But here is something important about Madam Walker's story. The money itself was never the final goal. Yes, financial success gave her comfort and security, but she believed strongly that success carried responsibility. She often spoke about lifting others as she climbed. In simple words, that meant helping others rise as she rose. Instead of closing the door behind her, she wanted to open doors for many more people. Have you ever thought about success that way? Not just as personal achievement, but as a chance to create opportunities for others? Madam Walker began using her wealth and influence to support causes that mattered deeply to her community. She donated money to schools, churches, and organizations working to improve the lives of Black Americans. One of the organizations she supported was the NAACP, which worked to fight racial injustice and promote civil rights. At a time when discrimination was deeply embedded in society, supporting such efforts required courage as well as generosity. Her role in the world was expanding again. She was no longer only a business leader. She was becoming a philanthropist and an activist, someone using resources and influence to push for positive change. And as her voice grew stronger, she began speaking not only about business success, but also about dignity, equality, and the importance of believing in one's own potential. As Madam C.J. Walker's wealth and influence grew, something very important became clear about her character. She never forgot where she came from. The memories of washing clothes for long hours, worrying about money, and struggling to raise her daughter alone stayed with her. Those experiences shaped the way she looked at success. For Madam Walker, success was not just about building a large company or becoming wealthy. It was also about using that success to improve the lives of others. She believed strongly that when someone gains opportunity, they should help create opportunities for more people. One of the most meaningful ways she did this was through philanthropy. Philanthropy simply means using your resources, often money, but also time and influence to support causes that help society. Madam Walker began donating to schools, community projects, and organizations working to protect the rights of Black Americans. At that time in the United States, racism was deeply rooted in many laws and social systems. Black citizens often faced violence, discrimination, and unfair treatment in education, employment, and voting. Madam Walker refused to stay silent about these issues. She became an active supporter of the NAACP, an organization dedicated to fighting racial injustice and protecting civil rights. The NAACP worked through legal action, public campaigns, and political advocacy to challenge unfair laws and discrimination. In one powerful moment, Madam Walker made a large donation to help support the organization's anti-lynching campaign. Lynching was a brutal form of racial violence that terrorized many Black communities during that era. By contributing to this campaign, Madam Walker used her voice and her resources to demand change. Imagine the courage required to take that stand. Publicly supporting civil rights efforts could attract criticism or even danger. But Madam Walker believed that silence in the face of injustice was not acceptable. Her activism extended beyond donations. She also spoke publicly about equality and opportunity. When she addressed audiences, she often reminded them that progress did not happen automatically. It required people who were willing to act. Picture her standing before a crowd of listeners, speaking with calm confidence about dignity and self-respect. She encouraged people to believe in their own value and to work toward building stronger communities. Have you ever noticed how powerful it is when someone who has achieved success chooses to use their platform to support others? It sends a message that success is not only about personal comfort, but also about responsibility. At the same time, Madam Walker continued strengthening the community of women entrepreneurs she had created. The Walker agents remained central to her vision. These women were not only representatives of her products, they were examples of independence and leadership within their communities. To celebrate and strengthen this network, Madam Walker organized national conventions for her agents. These gatherings were extraordinary events. Women traveled from many different cities to attend. They shared their business results, exchanged ideas, and celebrated their achievements. Imagine the atmosphere inside one of those meetings. Hundreds of women dressed elegantly, speaking proudly about the businesses they had built. Many of them had started with very little money or experience, yet now they were successful entrepreneurs, supporting families and inspiring others. Madam Walker often used these conventions to reward excellence. Agents who achieved strong sales results received prizes and recognition, but the recognition was not only about numbers. It was also about leadership, service, and community impact. This approach created something powerful: motivation combined with purpose. The women were encouraged not only to grow financially, but also to contribute positively to their communities. Think about your own environment for a moment. Imagine being surrounded by people who encourage growth, celebrate effort, and share knowledge openly. That kind of environment can change how you see your own potential. By this time, Madam C.J. Walker had become far more than a business founder. She was a symbol of what determination, creativity, and courage could achieve, even in the face of enormous barriers. And yet, despite everything she had accomplished, she continued looking forward, asking herself how her influence and resources could create even greater change in the years ahead. As the years passed, Madam C.J. Walker's influence continued to grow in ways that reached far beyond the world of beauty products. Her company remained strong, her network of Walker agents kept expanding, and her name had become widely recognized across the United States. But something deeper was also happening. She was becoming a symbol of possibility. For many black women during the early 20th century, society often sent a discouraging message that their opportunities were limited and their ambitions should remain small. Madam Walker's life told a completely different story. She had started with poverty, little education, and almost no resources. Yet she had built a national business and empowered thousands of others along the way. People began inviting her to speak at events, conferences, and gatherings. When she stood before audiences, she did not present herself as someone extraordinary or distant. Instead, she often reminded listeners that her journey began with the same struggles many of them were facing. Imagine sitting in a room listening to her speak. You might expect someone wealthy and famous to talk mainly about business strategies or financial success. But Madam Walker often spoke about perseverance, dignity, and self-belief. She talked about the importance of education and personal discipline. She encouraged people to invest in their own development and to support one another. One of her most famous ideas was simple but powerful. Success should not be kept for oneself alone. She believed strongly that those who rise should help others rise as well. Think about that idea for a moment. In many competitive environments, people focus only on personal gain. But Madam Walker believed progress was stronger when it was shared. That belief shaped the way she built her company and the way she lived her life. During this period, she also created a beautiful home known as Villa Luaro. Located in New York, the house was large, elegant, and carefully designed. For Madam Walker, it was more than a personal residence. It was a symbol of what was possible. Imagine the contrast between her early life and this moment. As a young woman, she had worked long hours as a washerwoman, earning barely enough to support her daughter. Now she owned one of the most impressive homes built by a self-made black entrepreneur at the time. But interestingly, she did not see the house simply as a private luxury. She often invited important thinkers, leaders, and activists to gather there. Discussions about business, politics, and civil rights took place inside those walls. In many ways, the home became a meeting place for people working to improve society. That detail reveals something important about her mindset. Even when she achieved financial success, she continued thinking about how her resources could serve a larger purpose. At the same time, the Walker business kept evolving. New products were developed, marketing strategies improved, and the network of agents continued expanding across the country. Some agents even began training new agents themselves, creating a ripple effect of opportunity. Picture how this system worked. One woman joins the Walker network and learns the business. She begins selling products, earning income, and building confidence. Later, she teaches another woman the same skills. That second woman begins her own journey, and soon she may help someone else. Over time, this chain of mentorship created thousands of independent business women. Many of them became respected leaders in their communities. They helped neighbors, supported local initiatives, and encouraged younger women to pursue independence as well. Have you ever noticed how powerful mentorship can be? When someone shares knowledge and encouragement, it shortens the path for the next person. Madam Walker understood this principle deeply, and she built it directly into her company culture. By now, her life story had begun inspiring people far beyond the beauty industry. Entrepreneurs studied her business model. Activists admired her commitment to justice. Young women looked at her journey and saw a future that previously felt impossible. Her life was becoming proof that determination, creativity, and courage could transform even the most difficult beginnings into something extraordinary. And as her influence continued spreading, the impact of her work was reaching more people than she could have ever imagined during those quiet nights of experimentation many years earlier. As Madam C.J. Walker entered the later years of her life, the scale of what she had built was becoming clearer to everyone around her. What began as a personal search for a solution to hair loss had grown into a nationwide enterprise. Thousands of women were now earning income through the Walker system, and the name Madam C.J. Walker had become a powerful symbol of entrepreneurship and independence. But even with all this success, Madam Walker remained deeply connected to the mission that had guided her from the beginning. She often reminded people that her achievements were not the result of luck alone. They came from persistence, discipline, and a willingness to keep moving forward when circumstances were difficult. In conversations and speeches, she sometimes reflected on the long path that had brought her there. She remembered the early days when she worked as a washerwoman in St. Louis, earning barely enough money to survive. She remembered the fear and uncertainty she felt after losing her husband and raising her daughter alone. Those memories stayed with her not as painful reminders, but as motivation. Think about that idea for a moment. Many people try to forget the hardest periods of their lives, but others use those memories as fuel, as a reminder of how far they have come and why their work matters. Madam Walker wanted her story to show people that beginnings do not define endings. She believed strongly that determination and learning could open doors that once seemed permanently closed. One of the most important legacies she continued strengthening during this time was the leadership community among the Walker agents. By now, many of these women had developed their own strong businesses. Some managed teams of agents, organized training sessions, and guided newcomers through the early stages of entrepreneurship. Imagine a young woman attending her first training session. Perhaps she feels nervous. Perhaps she has never sold anything before. Then she meets another woman who started exactly the same way a few years earlier and is now running a thriving business. That example can change how the newcomer sees her own future. Madam Walker loved seeing these transformations. She believed that financial independence could reshape entire families and communities. When a woman gained control over her income, she often invested in education for her children, improved living conditions, and supported neighbors who needed help. In that way, the Walker business was creating more than personal success stories. It was building a network of community leaders. Around this time, Madam Walker also continued supporting important social causes. She remained committed to civil rights and to organizations like the NAACP, which worked tirelessly to challenge racial injustice in the United States. She understood that economic progress and social justice were connected. When communities gained financial stability and education, they were better able to demand fairness and equal rights. Her life had become an example of how business success and social responsibility could work together. Instead of separating these ideas, she believed they strengthened one another. By 1919, Madam Walker's health had begun to decline. Years of intense work, travel, and responsibility had taken a toll on her body. Even so, she remained involved in her company and continued supporting the causes she cared about. When she passed away in May of that year, the news spread quickly. Many people mourned her loss, not only because she was a successful entrepreneur, but because she had opened doors for so many others. Yet something remarkable about her story became even clearer after her passing. The company she created continued operating. The network of agents continued working. The communities she had helped empower continued growing. In other words, her impact did not end with her life. Think about that kind of legacy for a moment. Some achievements disappear when the person behind them is gone, but other achievements keep creating change long after the founder is no longer present. Madam C.J. Walker had built something that would continue influencing lives for generations, and as people reflected on her journey, from a young orphan in the American South to a pioneering entrepreneur and philanthropist, her story began inspiring new waves of dreamers who wondered what might be possible in their own lives. When people look back at the life of Madam C.J. Walker today, it can feel almost like a legend. A woman born in poverty, the daughter of formerly enslaved parents, grows up to build a nationwide business and becomes one of the first self-made female millionaires in the United States. But when we slow down and look carefully at her journey, we see something even more meaningful than the headline. Her story was not made of one big miracle moment. It was built from many small decisions repeated over time. Decisions to keep working, to keep learning, and to keep believing that improvement was possible, even when the world around her made that belief difficult. Think again about the young Sarah Breedlove washing clothes in St. Louis, the long days, the sore hands, the small income that barely supported her and her daughter. From the outside, that life may have looked like a dead end. Yet inside that routine, she was observing problems, listening to people, and quietly experimenting with solutions. This is an important lesson that often hides in stories like hers. Many opportunities begin inside ordinary problems. The hair loss she experienced could have remained only a personal frustration. Instead, she turned curiosity toward it. She asked questions. She experimented. She looked for patterns. Have you ever tried doing that with a problem in your own life? Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What can I learn from this?" That small change in thinking can lead to unexpected discoveries. Another powerful part of Madam Walker's journey was her belief in community. When her business began to grow, she did not keep the opportunity to herself. She invited other women to join her, trained them, and helped them build their own financial independence. Imagine the ripple effect of that decision. One woman becomes a Walker agent and starts earning money for her family. Her confidence grows. She teaches another woman. That second woman begins her own journey, perhaps helping her children receive better education or improving her home. Over time, those small changes spread through neighborhoods and communities. Madam Walker often spoke about lifting others as she climbed. In simple words, she believed success should open doors, not close them. When she achieved financial stability, she used her resources to support education, community programs, and civil rights efforts. She contributed to organizations such as the NAACP because she believed economic progress and social justice should move forward together. Her story also reminds us of the power of identity. At one point, she chose to reinvent herself with a new name, Madam C.J. Walker. That name represented confidence and professionalism. It symbolized the person she was becoming. Sometimes we underestimate how important identity is in shaping our future. When you begin seeing yourself as someone capable of building, learning, or leading, your actions start changing. You take different risks. You try new ideas. You become more willing to step into opportunities. And perhaps the most inspiring part of Madam Walker's journey is that she never waited for perfect conditions. She did not begin with a large investment, advanced education, or powerful connections. She began with what she had, a problem to solve, curiosity to explore it, and determination to keep moving forward. Take a moment and reflect on that. What small idea or problem in your own life could become the starting point for something meaningful? It doesn't have to be a global company. It might simply be a new skill, a creative project, or a way to help people around you. Great journeys often start quietly, almost invisibly, just like hers did. Today, more than a century later, Madam C.J. Walker's story continues to inspire entrepreneurs, students, and dreamers around the world. Her life reminds us that progress is rarely about one giant leap. More often, it is about steady steps taken with courage and purpose. And maybe the most beautiful part of her story is this: the success she built did not belong only to her. It lived on in the thousands of women she empowered, the communities she supported, and the example she left behind. So as you move through your own days, your work, your challenges, your small experiments, remember the washerwoman who looked at a problem and decided to search for a solution. Sometimes the path to something remarkable begins exactly there.